Hello guys, and welcome back to take two of this video. The first version, I don't know what happened. It was this video below wasn't starting. So let's try this again. In this video, Adam Spice spoke at the ROTH conference, which was this 36th annual ROTH conference. I don't know what the heck this is, okay? But he spoke to investors and he said some very, very good things. So he disclosed that there might be a neutron delay. You make your mind up about it based on what he says. He disclosed about the future, how they see the future of neutrons, sellability, and what is the demand on the market. Very, very interesting data that I've never heard before. He discloses data about the future acquisition, why they got in this $300 million in convertibles. And the most important is he gives some very interesting clues about the space assets that they are building. Never heard before data. Very, very interesting clues. So I'm going to play this video for you. And then in the end, I'm going to give you my final thoughts. And as always, please make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. And then I'll see you at the end of this video. Now, let's see if it works this time.
Good morning. Welcome back to day two of the ROTH conference. My name is Suji De Silva. I'm the Semiconductor and Intelligent Systems Analyst here, which means I get to cover cool space companies like Rocket Lab. We have today the CFO of Rocket Lab, Adam Spice, here. Colin from the companies in the front here is.
Now what happened?
Good morning. Welcome back to day two of the ROTH conference. My name is Suji De Silva. I'm the Semiconductor and Intelligent Systems Analyst here, which means I get to cover cool space companies like Rocket Lab. We have today the CFO of Rocket Lab, Adam Spice, here. Colin from the companies in the front here as well.
Okay, guys. Maybe there will be a take three. Let me see if we can get this video again.
Companies in the front here as well. Feel free to talk to them afterward. Appreciate you guys having you guys here, and we're going to do a Q&A format, so we're going to go right into it. So there's a couple of elements of Rocket Lab that the business is broken up into: launch and space systems. Perhaps we can start with the launch business. Clearly out there, you've done very well with the Electron launches, 3 to date, a fourth one imminent. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about the likelihood of the 22 that you forecast for this coming year happening, whether there could be upside there, thoughts on the launch cadence?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, launch is hard, as I think we've all figured out now, as we've seen some of the competition kind of fall away over the last few years. So last year we launched 10 times. We were on path and on track to do 15 launches last year until we had an anomaly in September of last year where we failed to put a customer payload into proper orbit. As a result of that, it kind of set us back 3-4 months, right? We had to do the FAA investigations, get cleared to return to flight. And then put in the remediation so to make sure that that particular anomaly couldn't happen again. So I think we've been building our capabilities over the last several years. Electron had its first launch in 2017. We've had 45 launches to date. As you mentioned, we'll, knock on wood, we'll have another one. I think it's early tomorrow morning out of our Virginia range. So yeah, no, I think we're confident that we have the ability to produce the vehicles to launch at that rate. So yeah, I think everything's on track for that.
That's great.
I mean, the one thing, the caveat to that is, it's not always in our control. We have to have spacecraft to launch, right? So customers oftentimes, they can incur an issue late in their test process, their test campaign, and then have to take the satellite back apart, make some fixes. So unfortunately, you typically, if there's going to be an issue where a customer doesn't show up with their payload in time to launch, you really don't know that till about 90 days before. And then you got to kind of get them back in the flow and try to predict when they're going to get their fix in place. So launch is a lumpy business. It can be difficult to predict. I think if you kind of step back and look at kind of on a yearly basis, you have a little bit more confidence. Quarters are particularly hard to call because, like we have a launch coming up here in the next day or so, and, any weather could come in and push that into the next quarter, right? Things that are out of your control, which is why we really like the kind of the mix of roughly 70% coming from space systems, 30% coming from launch, because I think that gives you the growth from launch, but also buffets you, or I guess helps protect you from the buffeting and the volatility that comes from the lumpiness of launch.
Great. Now, in terms of your roadmap, you have Neutron coming. We just saw your competitor SpaceX put a Starship up in, for a test. So curious the thought process behind Neutron and the milestones for the larger vehicle you're planning.
Yeah, Neutron is super important, for a couple of reasons. Number one is it unlocks a much larger TAM for us. Now it puts us very much, head-to-head with SpaceX in that medium launch class. We think we're going to be well positioned given that Neutron is a brand new, designed vehicle designed for reusability from day one. So we think the efficiency is going to be there. The capabilities are going to be unique and advanced. And so if you look at a rocket development program, there's really kind of 4 different kind of work streams that are going on at any given time. There's all at the same time, actually. So you've got propulsion, which is always the longest lead, the most complex and riskiest part of a rocket development program. And then you have structures, which are your tanks and fairings and so forth. Then you have avionics, which are all the guidance, guidance capabilities for the rocket. And then you have infrastructure, and infrastructure broken down between manufacturing and pad. So there's a lot of things all going on at the same time. But again, like I mentioned earlier, propulsion's the trickiest and longest pole in the tent. And that one, we'll have the engine on the stand here in the April-May timeframe, and that'll really kind of let us know where we're at, right? Because I think everything is going according to plan to get to us to a launch by the end of the year. But propulsion really will be the gating item if there is one.
Okay, great. There's been some high-profile kind of competitors who've had challenges with launch businesses. So what's the supply-demand situation like in the industry for you guys?
Well, on the small dedicated launch side, we're largely the market, right? I think a lot of folks have kind of fallen out, whether that's the Virgin Orbit bankruptcy, Astra going private and abandoning their launch vehicle. Firefly has flown 4 times, failed 3 of the 4. You've got a host of people who've tried, but it's a very, very difficult thing to do. So we feel like we kind of set the market on the small dedicated launch side. On the medium side, that's where there's a real lack of supply. And so if you look right now, SpaceX has a large, you call them almost a monopoly. They represent over 80% of the launch volume. Now, a lot of that launch volume is servicing their own Starlink needs. But there are new constellations that are coming to market, whether those are on the commercial side or whether those are on the government side, that are going to require significant incremental launch capacity. And we think, we know there's a shortage of launch capacity in the medium class category today. So we think Neutron's coming to market at the right time. Because other than Falcon 9, there are really no medium lift launch vehicles that have any heritage at this point that are servicing the market.
Yeah, no, it's an exciting opportunity. We're going to talk about customers here, the government and commercial, and we'll revisit this question for space systems. But for launch, what are the opportunities here with the Department of Defense, the budget coming up in 25 and their indications there, and then maybe commercial customers and the opportunity there to give folks an idea of where the demand's coming?
Yeah, just like we strive for a kind of a 70-30 mix between launch and space systems, within either the launch or the space systems business, you want to have a mix of government and commercial, because commercial historically has represented kind of the real hockey stick growth opportunity, but also comes with lots of other risks as far as whether it's execution or financing risk and so forth. With government, government has become a hockey stick. So with particularly with the SDA program, where they're deploying this proliferated LEO architecture, that all of a sudden now has been one of the biggest growth drivers for the industry overall, which is unusual. Government's usually kind of predictable and steady and so forth, but now they've really provided a hockey stick. So we like having a lot of government in our mix, and I think the one thing that was exciting about this new SDA beta contract that we announced a month or so ago now for $515 million to build 18 spacecraft was the fact that now we're the prime. So we're now a government, DoD prime contractor, which opens up a lot of opportunities for us. So getting that kind of good housekeeping seal of approval and being anointed as a prime, we think is a huge enabler to continue to grow that government exposure, which again, we think is very positive because, if you look across whether we're talking about hypersonics capabilities, whether you're talking about, the capabilities for the various, departments of the government, there's no question that investment in space is continuing to grow.
And then on the commercial side, which verticals or segments of commercial are showing the most launch demand growth in 24?
I would say that historically we've had more launch related to Earth sensing. So Earth observation, whether that's with optical image taking, or whether
Spire here yesterday.
With SAR, RF occultation like Spire does. You've got SIGINT, that people like Hawkeye 360. So there's lots of different verticals, within Earth observation. And I'd say overall that's probably represented about 60 to 70% of our launch volume. but we're starting to see more of a shift towards probably more on the communication side of things. And we think there are a lot of opportunities to grow the business, especially once Neutron comes to market to deploy constellations that address the communications market.
Okay, why don't we talk about space systems? I think maybe you could just give a thumbnail of the business. It's less obvious than launch as to what you do there, and maybe we can start there.
Yeah, space systems actually is a pretty diversified business. So if you can think about the various verticals that we have within space systems, so we've acquired several companies over the last few years, and those companies brought capabilities that were servicing the merchant market for the small satellite market. So we've vertically integrated that, and with our space systems platform offerings like SDA and MDA Globalstar and so forth, the satellites that we're building, obviously we're using those subsystems in our platforms. But we also sell the subsystems and capabilities into the broader merchant market. So we've got the components or subsystems merchant business. We do a satellite design and manufacturing business. We have an on-orbit servicing business. And then ultimately, we have aspirations to get into the application side of the market, although we've been kind of holding our cards a little bit closer to the vest on that one because it's early days. But we think ultimately, if you have a launch platform, much like, SpaceX has kind of proven out, that, if you have launch, you can build a really impressive, kind of moat around your business, or one that's hard to get over because, nothing in space is easy. Satellites are difficult. Applications from space are difficult, but launch is by far the hardest thing to execute on. It's hard for not just the mechanics and physics of it, but just the cost of capital. And there was a period of time over the last, say, 3 to 5 years where there was a significant amount of capital flowing into launch companies, and I think those days are past. And I think now the people who have those capabilities have them. You can continue to kind of increment what you have, but I think kind of the days of like dozens of new kind of potential competitors in the launch business are in the rearview mirror.
Great. So you just recently won this large contract with the DoD, the SDA sats. Can you talk about what further opportunity there might be for you? Was that a one-off, or is there a pipeline forming there?
Oh yeah. So I think that this is just the very beginning of this, adoption of this low Earth orbit proliferated architecture that's going to create real enduring, kind of platform opportunities for us. What was most exciting about this one is, again, being the prime, so versus just providing the bus or just providing a payload. We're doing the full program priming. So I think absolutely there's incremental tranches of this SDA program. It's a multi-billion-dollar funded program. People may have seen an announcement, I think it was last week, about Star Shield, basically how SpaceX is building, over 1,000 satellites for the NRO, who clearly are now adopting this low Earth orbit architecture as well. So I think, the days of when there was the market was focused on GEO, where there was, satellite would sit 20,000 or so kilometers above the Earth, and there'd be, a handful of exquisite birds that would cost billions of dollars to make and hundreds of millions of dollars to launch. It's now transitioned to this low Earth architecture where, it's really helpful for a company, like us, where the demand is going to be kind of consistent as we kind of you deploy these constellations initially, then you have to replenish them. So it's goodness on if you're manufacturing the satellites, if you're launching the satellites, if you're operating the satellites, it's kind of this continuous flow of kind of rejuvenating the assets on orbit.
Okay, great, yeah. And then on the commercial side, I think interesting co-opetition forming right now is SpaceX putting Starlink up there. Jeff Bezos and Amazon want to put Kuiper up there, but they don't have a matching launch facility. So how is that going to play out, and how might you guys come into that with Neutron over the next few years?
Well, we think there's an opportunity across all of these emerging LEO constellations. I think that Kuiper is an interesting one because of, as you mentioned, the connection between Amazon and Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos' company, a launch company. And they haven't brought their New Glenn vehicle to market yet, but it's believed to be imminent. So, but if you look at the numbers of satellites that have to be launched, over the next, say, 5 years or so, not just on Amazon, across all the different applications, government and commercial, I mean, it's tens of thousands of satellites, right? Even if you exclude Starlink from that mix. So there's a huge opportunity. There are very few vehicles to service that demand. So if you look at the way that Amazon awarded the first batch of launch contracts, they offered across 3 providers, Arianespace, which is a European launch provider. You've got ULA, which we all know, and they've got a new launch vehicle called Vulcan that is supposed to be providing that service for Kuiper. And then you've got Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket. And so they spread the launches, like roughly, I think it was 85 launches over those 3 providers. And those are either all new vehicles that have never flown. But, so we think that Neutron, is going to build heritage quickly. And I think we're leveraging Electron's heritage with 45 launches to date. So we think we're going to get in the mix pretty quickly, and we'll be able to fight for some market share in that segment.
I know Neutron uses a lot of Electron technology, so that should be a fairly good ramp there. Now, you're being a little bit discreet on what you're trying to do with assets in space. So when I see the space industry and break it out the way I see it, there's launch, there's the space systems, which is what you put in space, and then there's owning the assets in space, which a lot of companies that are Rocket Lab customers are doing. But you have aspirations there, so maybe you can just talk about, I guess, a crawl, walk, run approach to that market.
Yeah, so, I think crawl, walk, run is the right way to look at the way that we approach these opportunities. So, we're not a, swing for the fences, bet the company on any one particular thing. We don't typically like to go in and take risk on a new market rather than we go into an existing market and take share through execution. And I think the applications are going to be somewhat similar. Now, what we've done, to build the company, and I mentioned that we acquired a few companies. We kind of first started selling merchant components, and then we started offering design services, and then we won some manufacturing contracts, and then we won contracts to operate those satellites in orbit. Everything that we've done along the way to execute those various programs has been teaching us how to do things. And so we've been fortunate that we've had customers that have really kind of paid us to build up our own kind of IP trove, if you will, of capabilities. And so, for example, when you look at the MDA Globalstar platform, that really was a very difficult platform to design and execute on because it was operating in a very harsh radiation environment, given the altitude that it was going to operate at, and given the expected useful life of that platform. So from that, we were able to learn how to build, high duration, very sophisticated, rad-hardened hardware. We took that, and then we leveraged that into what we won for the SDA Beta contract by adding some more capabilities there. But this one, pointed a little bit more, on obviously the classified and kind of encrypted communications capabilities. And then if you look at kind of everything that we do, it's all about getting us to a position where we can build our own satellites, operate our own satellites in orbit, and have that kind of recurring revenue stream come off those. But it takes time, and I think that we kind of the same thing happened with SpaceX, right? They basically were launching other people's stuff for a long time, and then they figured out which application they wanted to target. Now, the broadband from space application that SpaceX targeted with Starlink, that's probably not what we would be going for, just given the amount of capital required. And we have different access to capital, obviously, than SpaceX does. But there's lots of very interesting applications that require dozens or hundreds of satellites, not 40,000 satellites. And so I think once we have Neutron, we'll have all the pieces to basically do everything that we would ultimately need to do to have successful application business on orbit.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the MDA Globalstar contract they won was to put Apple's emergency SOS type functionality in space. And that was something Apple must have vetted you along with the other guys. So I imagine a year or two we'll be talking about what Microsoft's trying to do in space, what Google's trying to do in space. And you guys could very likely be in those conversations. So I would have you guys keep your eyes up for that. Let's get some fun questions here. SpaceX's private rounds are being valued at 160, 180. Let's just call it 200 billion because it's going to be there in a blink of an eye. What you guys are, kind of $2 billion. What's the disparity there? How do you see that disparity from your perspective? They obviously have Starlink and SpaceX in there.
Well, I think that, I think SpaceX has, established a pretty dominant position in a market that used to be controlled by slow-moving, prime-type companies. And, I think what they've done is they've brought the cost of launch down so materially, right? If you look back, 10 years ago, it would, ULA would charge, in some cases, $300 to $500 million to launch a satellite, right? And now if SpaceX comes along and a sticker price for a Falcon 9 is roughly $67 million. So they brought down the cost of launch pretty significantly, and in the process really kind of created a very interesting platform. I think they quickly realized, or, one could say it's hard to really kind of get inside, obviously somebody like Elon's head completely, but, one would think that everything that he has done with Falcon 9 and with Starship and everything else is all about kind of enabling, Starlink, right? Because Starlink is the kind of predicted cash cow for that business. So, I think that, we believe that we're one of the few that will actually be able to compete with SpaceX being a high cadence, commercial-oriented operator that can operate both on the commercial and the government side. And I'm particularly excited about what we're able to do to help enable, the national defense interests of the U.S. kind of with these capabilities. Because I think we need more of the SpaceXs and the Rocket Labs and probably fewer of the legacy primes kind of that operate on cost-plus models and don't move particularly quickly, don't innovate. So innovation is really kind of the enabler, and I think, nobody thought that you could do a reusable kind of landable launch vehicle, and they did it, right? I think, and they got rewarded for that. And so I think innovation is the key, and I think you'll see a lot of new innovation come to market with Neutron. Some novelty around the propulsion system that we're developing that'll drive efficiency and ability to get to, again, a high cadence with a lot of rework. So I think we've been pointed the way by what SpaceX has done to be successful, and I think we're kind of the closest kind of behind them as far as catching. And I think ultimately that valuation disparity will have to get dissolved, right? I think once we have Neutron, which will go head to head with Falcon 9, we think that our valuation proposition is going to be very, very clear to investors.
The thing I should make sure the audience knows is, unlike Electron, Neutron will be fully reusable, so it will go off and come back and be reused, and that's going to kind of change the dynamic there. You recently did a fairly large convert offering. You have the funding to make it to break even, but you also, I think, have enough room for flexibility for financial moves here. Talk about the thought process behind the funding and what some of the strategic opportunities are for you guys, the way you see it.
Yeah. So we exited last year with almost $330 million of liquidity. So we've been very fortunate that we've not been hamstrung to do strategic things kind of along our journey. But we were starting to feel a little bit constrained, particularly when it came to exercising inorganic growth options. We acquired 4 companies relatively early in our lifespan as a company. But we think there's other opportunities out there. Particularly, it's to raise $355 million as a new space company in this market is no small feat. And there are lots of peers out there who are struggling to gain access to any incremental capital. So we think there's buying opportunities out there, and we think those are going to accelerate as we move forward. And there are a few key strategic capabilities that we think would kind of nest well underneath what we have in our portfolio today. The money that we raised really had nothing to do with Neutron or with executing on our existing space systems business. It's really to drive inorganic growth. We've seen some really compelling opportunities. Like last year, we bought the Virgin Orbit assets out of bankruptcy, or a portion of those assets out of bankruptcy, for 16 cents on the dollar, and essentially got a fully operational rocket factory, turnkey, 2 blocks down the street. So when you have capital, you find opportunities to effectively put it to work, and we think that's going to be the case going forward.
I'll open up to the audience for questions. We have one in the back there.
Yeah, so our deals have typically been key capabilities or subsystems on the satellite bus, and I think we've largely fleshed that out. There are a couple things within that satellite bus architecture that we could further vertically integrate into. There's always different forms of propulsion, chemical, electrical. There's different flavors of radios. There's incremental capabilities around structures like tanks and so forth. So there's lots of places you can go. I think in some cases it'll be because they represent really good growth opportunities in and of themselves in a growing market. In some cases, it'll be the fact that we just want to de-risk our programs, because there's certain things that aren't necessarily great growth drivers, but they really kind of de-risk execution on these larger multi-$100 million programs. So it'll be a combination of those kind of things. Plus, we're starting to work our way towards kind of payload capabilities. So that's the one thing that we've got great bus capabilities. Right now, we have to rely on third parties for payload. So you'll probably start to see us doing things that will position us to have more capabilities on payload hardware. Payloads are all very application specific. So you can think of Earth observation, whether it's like SAR, synthetic aperture radar, or whether it's optics, or whether it's things like creating comms capabilities, right? So there's fundamental kind of subsystems or building block capabilities that you need, and you'll start to see us pick those up, and those will provide a little bit of breadcrumbing towards the ultimate end applications that we're going to service. Because again, we only kind of are doing things that ultimately prepare us longer term to own those assets in orbit.
Any other questions from the audience?
So the average selling price of Electron right now is about, on average, $8 million. When we're launching one a month, which has kind of been the rate that we were at last year, you kind of get into the, I would say, mid-20s kind of non-GAAP gross margin on that, and kind of treading neutrality when it comes to contribution margin on that cadence. But as you step up to the cadence we have this year, which is 22 launches, next year add a few more launches on top of that, we really start to increment towards our long-term target model of roughly 50 points of non-GAAP gross margin, and then kind of mid-20s kind of contribution margin from that line of business. Neutron is going to have a significantly higher launch price. So that's kind of targeting, if you want to think in the $55 million-ish range, which kind of prices it on a per kilo basis competitively with the Falcon 9. But cost per kilo can be a little bit misleading because, if you need a dedicated rocket, you don't pay for the capacity that you use, you pay for the whole rocket. So theoretically, that gives us room to kind of price up to where Falcon 9 is more into kind of the high 60s and maybe towards 70. And with that higher ASP, I think comes a lot of goodness in the P&L. So, 2023 was a heavy investment year in space systems and in Neutron. 2024 is really a heavy investment year in Neutron, again, to get that first launch off. Once we get that first launch off, there's a lot of good things that happen to the P&L because you basically pass that R&D bubble, right? You get through that, and then you start getting revenue contribution from Neutron kicking in. We'll be well into the revenue recognition under this big government SDA contract, as well as kind of at the tail end of this Global Star MDA. So, we think a lot of things are pointing in the right direction for kind of the mid 2025 onward period from a P&L perspective.
I think the launch business is a relatively fixed cost intensive business, so
very high fixed costs. So it's all about cadence and absorbing those fixed costs.
So it'll scale nicely. I think with that, we're out of time. So I'd like to thank Adam and Colin from Rocket Lab for coming, and thanks everybody.
Thanks, Suji.
Have a good day at the show.
So this was his talk. What did you guys think? Let me know in the comments. I just want to give you my most important takeaways. One of them is he said that blah, blah, blah. I can't speak. It's too late. So the engine test of Archimedes, it looks like it's pushed from end of March to beginning April to April, May. And I was not happy to hear that. But at the same time, this is a rocket program. I've said it many times before that if Neutron is not on the pad by December, but on February, technically, for me, that's on time. It's very rare how much on schedule and in budget they have been with this rocket. And, I still give them the benefit of the doubt because they promised that they will re-update the program if they need to. And as long as they have a viable path to launch on December, they will not raise the white flag. That's what Peter Beck said. And also that many things happen concurrently. So it's not like because the engine test is not done, they are stopping with the infrastructure. So basically, just yesterday we got pictures of them pouring concrete and making the Neutron integration facility. So I'm still giving them the benefit of the doubt. Then another thing that was very, very interesting is talking about Neutron's future markets. So they basically said that gone are the days when everybody's focused on geostationary geostationary orbit, which means that the satellite goes at the same speed as Earth. So from us mortals looking up, the satellite is always in the same position. And he said that these were billions to build and hundreds of millions of dollars to launch. And instead, the whole world is moving into low Earth orbit constellations with very cheap launches. And these ones also not only give you a lot of launches, but what doesn't happen in this geostationary orbit is that you basically have zero atmosphere. And once you put the satellites up there, they are always there. But on low Earth orbit, you have a slight atmospheric drag. And that slows down the satellite, and after like 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years, the satellites deorbit. So if you have a constellation of thousands of satellites, you have to constantly replenish them. So it becomes a very plannable future business. And he said, because right now it's only Starlink that is a mega constellation, but we know that Kuiper is coming. We know that other commercial interests are looking at making low Earth orbit constellations. We know that the US government is moving into low Earth also for their defense. We know that other governments are doing this. And he said that there is not enough launch vehicles, even if you count Starship in the picture, to launch all these things and service them in the future. So he thinks that Neutron is coming at the exact right time. Then, what is very, very interesting is he said that they're not going to go into the broadband, and they will not compete with SpaceX, which is very, very good news, because we know that I said it many times. If they need to do that, they are going to dilute the F out of us, because it's very, very money intense, or the stock price has to be way up. So it doesn't matter for us, but right now the stock is going the opposite way. Company doing amazing, the stock, we don't know what it's doing. And he said that they're purposely keeping the cards very close to the chest, which we have basically known. That's Rocket Lab for you in a nutshell. And he said that there is very interesting application ideas that require dozens or hundreds of satellites, which is not a lot of money at all to do. And once you have Neutron, hundreds of satellites, that can be one launch with Neutron, or a couple of launches, and then you have your application, which would mean that they are able to do it from the money that they have on hand, which is freaking-tastic if that is the case. So that was a very, very interesting clue that he has given there. Then the second one is that they are planning to acquire a company in the payload. So he says that the whole company is focused, like every step that they do is to have their own application up in space. Neutron is part of that. All the companies that they acquired previously, like Solero, the reaction wheels, all of them are to be able to make their own stuff. And the last thing that they don't have is the payloads. And he said that, when you see what tech that is going to be, that is giving you breadcrumbs into which direction they're going. So that is going to be very, very interesting what they acquire here. And nobody's asking him when he thinks this acquisition is going to come. It very much seems like they just wanted to have the money handled, and they will opportunistically handle this. And again, he reiterated that the balance sheet looks amazing the P&L looks amazing. The balance sheet already looks amazing, okay? From 2025, he said that, then this R&D bubble is over. The SDA and the Global Star constellations are in the revenue recognition phase. So it does look like we're getting adjusted cash flow positive in 2025, or it will be very clear how we get there. It looks like the constellation that they're building is not going to be as capital intensive as I feared. That's fantastic news. Looks like Neutron might be slightly delayed. That was a bad news, but maybe it was just unlucky wording. And Neutron, if it's true what he said, has a lot of future demand. So overall, I think this was very bullish for the company. If you watched this far, please let me know in the comments who you are, because then you're awesome. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel. And see you in the next video. In a day, it's rocket launch. I can't speak. It's really late here and I didn't sleep good. So rocket launch from Virginia. So I might be live streaming it. May the force be with you. See you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.